you so much for joining us for this discussion today on inclusive philanthropy for inclusive development, systems thinking approach. We are thrilled to have this opportunity to exchange ideas and talk with such an amazing and inspiring group of people from the philanthropic community as well as students. We hope that we will learn a lot today from you, and hopefully you will also find this session meaningful. Today's session is jointly conducted by the Center for Philanthropy for Inclusive Development, ISDL, and DESTA LLP. The Center for Philanthropy for Inclusive Development is a center of excellence at ISDL. It is dedicated to catalyzing philanthropy as a force for inclusive development through a combined approach of rigorous research, learning programs, knowledge exchanges, and convenings of diverse voices of the philanthropic ecosystem. DESTA is dedicated to providing research and consulting services for sustainable development using systems thinking and systems dynamics. DESTA stands for Developing Ecosystems for Systemic Transformation and Adaptation. It is also a word in Amharic having the meaning joy and happiness. So since we are done with introductions, let me just jump right into a brief presentation before we move into our workshop. Over the last 2 years, CPID team has been trying to develop an understanding of the philanthropic landscape and the role that philanthropy is playing and potentially can play in elevating the living standards of marginalized communities and addressing the widening inequality divide in the country. Our research, as well as conversations with a wide range of stakeholders from the philanthropic ecosystem, has provided us some valuable insights into the drivers, motivations, gaps, practices, and challenges in the philanthropic ecosystem today. We have been inquiring into how the methods and approaches of systems thinking could apply to philanthropy and could be used to make it more effective. And also to understand the intricate relationship between several of the key actors in philanthropy. Some of them can be funders, social purpose organizations, philanthropic support organizations, the state institutions, and of course, most importantly, the communities. Through our research, we have uncovered some traps or recurring patterns that exist in the system which make philanthropic funding, so to blunt the force of philanthropic funding. Some of which we will be sharing with you all today and have a brief discussion with you on these traps. India's economic growth story, while it is very impressive in terms of GDP figures and industrial expansion, it presents a stark contrast when examining its what's famously called the trickle-down effect on various strata of society. Despite achieving high rates of economic growth consistently for the last at least 10-15 years, the benefits have not been uniformly distributed across the country. This uneven distribution has led to a scenario where wealth accumulation is highly concentrated, resulting in a significant increase in the number of millionaires and billionaires in the country. While at the same time, communities belonging to specific castes, specific regions, what we refer to as marginalized communities, continue to struggle with poverty and limited access to resources. The disproportionate economic growth has exacerbated existing societal inequalities, or at least are not addressing it, leaving behind several sections of the population who do not benefit from these benefits of economic development. The pattern of development, which is both unequal and exclusive, highlights the critical gap in the socio-economic fabric of India. The situation underscores the need for more inclusive economic policies that ensure equitable access to opportunities and resources for all segments of the society, particularly groups that have been historically disadvantaged and marginalized. The challenge lies in bridging these disparities to transform economic growth into holistic and inclusive development. In India, the public sector plays a crucial role in financing social sector initiatives with significant contribution, mostly from the central government and then from state governments. However, there is a critical and vital role that philanthropy can play alongside government efforts, because clearly government funding itself is not proving enough for the development sector. Philanthropy, by its inherent nature, possesses a greater degree of flexibility and agility. This allows it to focus on causes, communities, and regions that are often overlooked and remain underfunded. Philanthropic organizations are uniquely positioned to foster innovation. They have the capacity to support and implement programs that might be considered too risky or too experimental for government institutions, public institutions, or larger private institutions. By taking on these challenges, philanthropy can test new approaches and models, which, if successful, can be adopted on a larger scale, including adoption by public institutions. And we have examples of how philanthropic models of development have been adopted by the government. But for the longest of time, philanthropy in India has primarily centered around charitable giving, institution building support, enabling delivery services for essential, and creating livelihood opportunities, particularly in the areas of health and education. The accelerated growth rate of the private sector funding and diversification in philanthropic approaches and practices has the potential to play a critical role in driving systemic impact for social change in the country. However, philanthropy needs a shift at a faster pace from traditional charitable approaches to one that encompasses elements of inclusive investments, and in which it can happen. One is in human rights, gender, etc. With a rapid rise in domestic philanthropy from individuals and corporates, it becomes more critical to ensure that philanthropic funds are used meaningfully and effectively in areas where they are needed the most. Second, a bolder version of philanthropy must be constructed, construed, conceptualized for inclusivity and equality to influence long-term sustainable change. Philanthropy especially has the ability and the capacity to innovate, to strengthen institutions, to create an ecosystem of knowledge creation and influence the public narrative and policy change, which is needed for addressing the structural causes of inequality in India. And the third is that philanthropy needs a strategic shift to focus on the root causes of social issues rather than the symptoms. This approach will enable long-lasting transformative change, ensuring a more equitable and just society. Domestic private philanthropic capital in India has emerged as a significant force in helping achieve our SDG commitments and building a resilient society. We also know that CSR, ultra HNI contributions towards the total philanthropic investments form a large chunk of domestic philanthropic capital and are expected to grow over the next 5 years, 10 years. At the same time, foreign funding in the contribution of foreign funding in the private philanthropic pool has been consistently declining due to several regulatory and other global issues. But it is worth noting that the affluent in India donate less compared to their counterparts in other countries, especially more developed countries like US, UK, and China, at all wealth levels, which also indicates that there is a greater potential for Indian philanthropy to achieve. We find that certain themes, sectors, causes like education and healthcare remain the top choices of philanthropic contribution, especially CSR. Conversely, the focus is extremely low on areas such as human rights, gender equality, women empowerment, and other local community efforts. But the question is, how can philanthropy expand its focus to support organizations that are working with underserved causes, underserved geographies, and populations? And the decline in foreign funds has coincidentally happened at the same time as while these two sources may have substituted each other in terms of quantum, they differ in character significantly. There are fewer SPOs working on causes like Dalit upliftment, tribal affair, tribal welfare, which are traditionally which were traditionally supported by foreign contributions. Areas like prisoner welfare, sports, mental health, etc., seem to get less attention of CSR compared to what it used to get from foreign investors. There was a recent study which revealed that organizations working in the social sector, which are led by Dalit, Bahujan, and Adivasi communities, face significantly higher funding challenges compared to their counterparts. Funding inequities aren't limited to specific themes only. Certain geographic regions in India receive disproportionate attention and support, while others remain underfunded and remain frequently overlooked, like states from the Northeast, Bihar, Jharkhand, Odisha. The majority of funds are allocated to states like Maharashtra, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, which are interestingly not the poorest states, nor they are the lowest on human development indicators. Just to give an example, according to an OECD report, OECD is Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, private philanthropy for gender equality did not always target the geographies where there was a large gender gap or where there were a lot of gender issues. Also, there was no correlation between CSR funding and state level female or male wage ratios or states with highest proportion of crimes against women. Now, the question, an important question that we ask ourselves is, how can philanthropy invest or how does philanthropy invest to strengthen the overall ecosystem, to strengthen the overall infrastructure of this philanthropic system? For instance, there is a geographical disparity in the distribution and concentration of intermediary support to social purpose organizations also. And most of them are concentrated in a select few regions, particularly the states which already receive high funding. Also, there is a need for investment in areas like research, data, monitoring, evaluation, technology support, etc., to increase the effectiveness of the philanthropic funding. All these issues we at CPID find, along with our partners, TESTA, that systems thinking can play a very critical role in addressing several of these fundamental issues. At CPID, it has helped us to understand the existing landscape of philanthropy, the motivation, the structures, the stakeholders. How are these stakeholders connected to each other? How do they influence each other's thinking, each other's practices? And we have also found that if we do not have this approach to philanthropy, there are some recurrent problems that keep occurring in this space. And I will let Mihir from this to talk more about some of these problems, what we call the system traps in philanthropy. And to take this forward, may I now request Mihir to talk about what systems thinking is, how it is going to be helpful in the philanthropic landscape, and also what can we learn from this session today in terms of philanthropy and systems thinking. Mihir, can I hand over it to you now?
Yes, Pratyush, thank you very much. Thank you, Pratyush, for providing the all-important inputs, data, and patterns, and also bringing in systems thinking into the questions that you already raised. One of the challenges that we're seeing around in the development space is that the funding that is going in solving the problems is not really making the problems go away. We are seeing problems are resurfacing in different forms, in different ways. So they're repeatable. They're repeating themselves in different forms, different places. So the question here we have is the funding actually helping us transform the system? Or is it just working at a symptomatic level? So we have identified 3 stories which depict this specific characteristic of problem solving that we have seen in the development space. We will show you those 3 stories, and then also we'll do a short brainstorming session with all of you. But before I go there, a quick crash course on what systems thinking is, assuming that all of you here in this room and people online are not necessarily initiated in systems thinking. Systems thinking is essentially a process of understanding relationships within systems, between different systems, and how all these relationships and the interplays between them leads to emergence of change. That's essentially what it is. Consider a human body, all the different organs, different subsystems in a human body, a nervous system, digestive system, respiratory system, and the different organs. The interaction between all of them actually produces an emergence of life. So a human body is just not a sum of the parts, it's actually an interaction between the parts and between different systems that produces the emergence of life. Similarly, social systems, organizations, economy, all these are made up, all the dynamics that we see in the real world are happening due to interaction of various actors, various agents, various systems. And hence, if we live in a world of systems, it is important that we try to understand them better. And that is what systems thinking helps us to do. The short form of this definition, if you want to remember this, a process of understanding interactions of parts that lead to emergence of change. Important to remember, it's a process and not an end in itself. It is a process of understanding, not necessarily predicting or blaming. It is a process of understanding not just parts. Experts understand parts very well of systems, but today I think the need is to synthesize the expertise so that we can understand what outcomes these interactions are producing. And we are very interested to understand the emergence of change, as Pratish was also presenting through his data, the kind of emergence we have seen on the lopsidedness of funding going to specific issues or specific places. Why is this emergence happened? If you wish to understand that, maybe systems thinking is one of the disciplines that you should use. What is the approach we use in systems thinking? And this is the metaphoric approach. It's called an iceberg, where we say that what we see happening around ourselves are just events. Events are tip of the iceberg. They don't really tell you something more than what you can see right now. But a level below are patterns of change over time. As Pratish was presenting, the patterns of funding that has gone into specific areas or specific geographies, which are increasing over time. The divide between rich and poor, the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. All these are patterns of change. Patterns tell us stories of change. Are we moving in the desired direction? Are we not moving in the desired direction? It tells you the history of the system. 2 levels below the iceberg, we say there are system structures. These are policies, these are rules, these are norms, said, unsaid norms which are actually driving the patterns that we see happening in the real world. System structures essentially are how our parts related with each other that is producing the outcomes that we see. And at the last known end of the iceberg are mental models. This is basically our belief systems, which actually shape the policies or the norms that we make in and around ourselves. Unfortunately, the world is very busy in fixing events. So we have been continuously thinking symptoms. So when you think symptoms, you're actually fixing events. But our endeavor in systems thinking is to then go below the waterline to be able to see below the waterline. So we say expand your boundary of care, and we say expand your temporal boundary, think dynamics. Don't look at problems as static events. There are patterns. There are patterns which are asking us difficult questions. So we say we apply dynamic thinking. To understand system structures, you have to look at cause and effect and the interplays between these different cause and effect variables, which actually act as a policy or as a structure of a system, which then produces these dynamic patterns. The case of air pollution in Delhi and the northern India is a very peculiar case of how policies and emergent structural changes that has happened in the last 15 years has actually caused this chronic problem of air pollution. And when we look at mental models, we're actually questioning our theory in use. What are the beliefs and mental models that are driving other system structures? I'll give you a very small example to bring this theory to light. Take the case of an event that we see at some places happening. And the event is, next slide, lack of all-round mental and physical development of students. That's one of the events that we often see in the society. Young school-going, college-going students lack all-round physical and mental development. Now let's look at what potentially could be below the waterline. We start with mental models. So what are the mental models that actually drive this event? One could be that sports is not a financially stable career option, and that belief of the society or the household actually drives the policies that they make at homes or at schools. Another mental model could be that playing sports will never make one rich. That, of course, is changing now, but that has been the dominant societal mental model. Another one potentially could be, in Hindi, we say, padhoge, likhoge, banoge nawab, kheloge, kudoge, banoge kharab, which means if you study well, you will become a rich man. If you don't study well, then you will be a spoiled brat. What kind of policy structures has these mental models created in the society or even in households? Next one. Parents allow children to play sports only as the recreational activity. Now, that is a cause and effect and a policy structure here at play. Next. The primary focus of children is on studies, even at the cost of sports. That's how the individuals make the rules for themselves. Next one. And children are allowed to play sports only after finishing their studies. So if you don't finish the studies, you cannot go out and play a sport. That's a norm. That's a rule. Now, these system structures produce interesting patterns of behavior. One of the patterns is that over time, the education systems become even more and more competitive. Just like we had a pattern that Pratish had shared, where the rich becoming richer and poor becoming poorer. In this case, we are seeing an escalation happening in competition. That is the pattern this structure produces. Over time, children tend to get fatigued from studies. By the time they reach their teenagers or young adulthood, they are already fatigued from the studies. That is the pattern that we see. And over time, children tend to get overweight and lack fitness, which of course results into the event that we see, lack of all-round mental and physical development of students. So that's an example, an illustrative example of, if you go deeper into the iceberg, what kind of patterns, system structures, and mental models you could figure out. This I'm just showing you as an example, but if you conduct a full-scale study using systems thinking, you can apply the iceberg through a survey process or through a group modeling process and figure out these mental model system structures, patterns, and events. A typical response that the society generates in solving this problem is, next one, is a classical case of following a diet and a gym. That is a very symptomatic solution. And what kind of patterns and system structures this typically produces. It makes the routines even more stringent. Humans become machines, and the routines are such that you are tracked to those. It also raises the ambitions to overcome competition. And what kind of a mental model typically drives this behavioral response is what we call survival of the fittest. So even the solutioning of complex problems or systems are often driven by mental models. Mental models are deep-seated. We don't have easy access to them, and hence it requires us to go deeper into the iceberg and be able to see below the waterline. So that's an approach of applying systems thinking. Now we are going to show you three system stories that we have identified from the research that CPID did in the philanthropic space. We call it system traps. These are system archetypes that we have identified in the system. And we are going to talk about three stories, and then we are going to do a brainstorming session with all of you on what interventions could be done to help the system break out of these traps. I can pause for a moment here in case if people have any questions before I move forward. Happy to take it now. Okay, we are good then to continue. All right, let's continue. So we're going to present three stories. First story talks about the disproportionate funding that has gone into climate mitigation and climate adaptation. There are visible results that people can see, right? Immediate outcomes. For example, reduction in emissions by mitigation and also through carbon capture. So the moment we see that we are able to reduce CO2 emissions, that leads to a reinforcement. Next, please. That leads to a reinforcement of funding, which goes into mitigation solutions. As this funding moves towards mitigation instead of adaptation, it leads to NGOs, a more number of NGOs and SPOs which start engaging or developing climate mitigation programs. As this happens, it leads to more efforts being put into research and innovation for discovering and developing mitigation strategies. And that further reinforces the results that we see in terms of technology development, carbon capture and storage, green energy, renewable energy, efficient use of energy appliances, and so on and so forth. And that again reinforces more funding going towards climate mitigation, which is the good part of it. But however, there is also a side effect of this. As funds for mitigation increase instead of adaptation, there are fewer and fewer NGOs or organizations, think tanks involved in finding deep adaptation solutions, in finding truly what people can do or could do to adapt to the changing climate. As fewer institutions are engaged, that results into fewer resources to tackle the complexity of climate adaptation. Hence, our knowledge frontiers are not getting challenged or broken. And that produces fewer measurable, knowable, verifiable results for climate adaptation. And that then makes adaptation as the weaker cousin of the family of climate solutions. And hence, people are drawn towards investing more in finding climate mitigation solutions instead of climate adaptation. And that we call is the trap of visible results. The system is trapped into funding more and more visible results. Although the real deep transformation might happen, could happen also through adaptation to climate change. But the investments or the funding that has gone into mitigation vis-a-vis adaptation is to the tune of 10:1. So the ratio between mitigation funding and adaptation funding is 10:1 or around 8:1. That goes to show the disproportional focus that mitigation has got over adaptation. And it's a great cause of worry now because as climate change is happening, as we are breaching the increase in temperatures, we are seeing that adaptation is becoming more and more crucial because we have to learn how to live with the changes that are already underway. But even then, the focus or the funding towards adaptation has not been enough because one, the results are not measurable, and two, because of over focus on mitigation, there are fewer NGOs and innovations happening in the adaptation space. So that is the first story that we wanted to present today. The next one. The next one talks about how the solutioning around gender and around women empowerment has happened through education interventions. So as poverty and socioeconomic challenges increase, especially gender imbalance and especially to do with women empowerment, it typically the response has been to strengthen the education system, which has been seen as a quick solution, saying increase the number of women or young girls going into schools. And that should temporarily fix the question or the problem of gender disparity. Now, what this has resulted into is that as education related initiatives have increased, it has led to improvement in school enrollment and learning. The patterns show that the rate of dropouts might have reduced. The enrollment rate is steady, even if it is not increasing. And that has resulted into more people getting attracted, more NGOs and donors getting attracted towards getting girls to school. Now, because of the lopsided focus towards school education, it has resulted into a weakening of knowledge and capacity to solve deeper systemic challenges, which are social challenges like caste, gender equality, and the social power dynamics that exist. So very few work has happened in the deeper social structural challenges, and that has weakened the feedback loop, which could potentially have transformed the system through change in cultures, societal norms. But actually, the focus has been on fixing the system through education-related initiatives. And as more and more programs have happened around it, it has led to a growth in school and education-driven programs. So while the focus should also have been on developing fundamental solutions, but the symptomatic solutions have been dominant. And because of that, it has created an addiction towards funding and towards developing more and more education related programs as a hack of solving deeper gender related problems in societies, creating a side effect of reduced focus on a long-term fundamental solutions and erosion of abilities to work on long-term fundamental solutions. Yeah. That is the second trap that we want to talk about today is addiction to short-term solutions. Even if we know that we have to work on a fundamental solution, our abilities are not really there. Our practices and funding and institutional capacities are not adequately there because we have been busy, we have been addicted in continuously funding and working upon the short-term solutions. That is our story number 2. The third one we have talks about barriers for women participation in local governance. So in a small community, maybe a rural community, a village community, we want to strengthen the role of women in the local governance space. In response to this, to overcome this barrier, there have been efforts made to enable women participation, to increase women participation. One of the ways of doing this as an intervention or as a policy is to increase the seats reserved for women in Panchayati Raj. That's what one of the interventions focuses upon. And the assumption or the hypothesis here is that as seats reserved for women in Panchayat Raj would increase, it would reduce the barriers for women participation in local governance because we are putting women in the position of power there, right? So that is a balancing feedback loop, which hopefully will fix the system and improve the role of women in local governance. However, we observed a side effect where a few places where women are on paper playing the role of being the head of the panchayat. However, it is only for paperwork. But in reality, when you go there, we see that men are the ones who have created a parallel invisible power structure, which undermines the woman's authority of women-led offices. So while on paper, it is women who are the head of the panchayat, but it is men who actually take the decisions on ground, while women take the role of filling up the paperwork or signing the documents. And that is one of the side effects it has created. And the barriers for women participation in local governance continue to exist. It may not be visible to us on papers, but in reality, at some places, it still does exist. So what has happened here? We have tried to fix the problem of barriers for women participation by developing a policy solution. But that policy may not necessarily understand what is happening on ground in terms of power dynamics. And because the policy doesn't take into account what is happening on ground in power dynamics, it actually created a new problem. So today's solution potentially could lead to tomorrow's problem of a power hack that happens on ground, where the men take active role in implementing or managing the local governance, while women continue to be shown as the people in power on paper. That has created another power dynamics at play. Hence, we say quick fixes that are done without thinking about long-term effects or without trying to understand the real system on ground could potentially backfire. It may not happen immediately. In the short run, it may show you indications of success, but in the long run, after a time delay, it could potentially create side effects, which might create new problems that you have to overcome. So, and we're not saying this is happening everywhere, but in some places we have found evidence that there are side effects of policy solutions being implemented. Hence, it calls for a better engagement with ground realities, especially in diverse environments like India, where we could have a diversity of cultures, places, and it requires us to understand the ground reality and the power plays, the social, environmental, and economic before we design policies to transform the systems. So that's our third story of how at some places we have observed quick fixes have backfired after time delay. So three stories in total. The first one talks about the lopsided investments or funding going into mitigation or adaptation when talking about climate solutions. The second talks about how we have been addicted to continuously funding the same interventions, which help us see some immediate outcomes in terms of education, but it does not really transform the system for when it comes to gender mainstreaming and power dynamics. And the third is the method of finding policy fixes or quick fixes, which we think might solve the problem, but in the long run, it creates another side effect, which we have to be aware of, and thus calls for applying systems thinking. So those were the stories that we had to share with all of you. We can pause here and take some questions. There are people sitting online also, and if you would like to put in the chat box, or if anybody from the host, RISE team host, if you can help us get those questions coming up here, then we can respond to those. Yeah. We have a small brainstorming activity planned, but before we go there, if there are any questions or any opinions or thoughts people would like to share, we are happy to take it now.
We do not have anything in the chat at the moment.
Okay. On Zoom, there are people, I believe, sitting in the live stream also, right? If there is nothing coming from the live stream also, then we can move forward.
No questions from live.
Okay. Okay, so we have planned a small brainstorming session now, and we would invite all the participants who are also sitting online, maybe to join the Zoom link, so that, because we're going to open the breakout here and put you into small groups and give you around 20-30 minutes to respond to some questions that we have. So if you can ask people to come in to the Zoom link, then we can open the breakout rooms. Okay, so what we are going to do there is we are going to select one track each for 3 breakout rooms. So we're going to have 3 breakout rooms each room having one story, one trap. And we'll ask people to join the story that appeals to them the most. And then we have 3 questions that we will give you to discuss and respond to in your breakout room. Yeah. Okay. There are 3 questions that we want each breakout room to respond to. What are the belief systems, norms, this could be social norms, and policies that are driving these stories? What do you think are the belief systems, norms, policies that are driving these stories? And you can write down on a slide, which will give you, after you have done your discussions for each of the questions, you can write down your responses. What interventions could help the system break out of this trap? So what changes do you suggest in those stories that we have presented? What interventions should happen to help the system break out of this trap? And the third question is, who are the stakeholders that need to collaborate for these interventions? So who are the people who could potentially do these interventions to help the system break out of this trap, right? So 3 questions. What are the belief systems, norms, societal norms, or policies that are driving these stories? What interventions do you think could help the system break out of this trap? And who are the stakeholders that need to collaborate to make these interventions happen? These are the 3 questions that we want all of you to discuss. You can pick and choose a breakout room, which has the story title given in that breakout room that appeals you the most. Walk into that breakout room. These questions will be given to you. The traps, the visual diagrams that we have made, we'll also provide that. The facilitators would have that. And you can also go through those loops when you're preparing these responses.